Hi, this is Teddy, and today you're listening to Brittany Ramos DeBarros, who's running for Congress in the 11th Congressional District of New York. Get your vaccine!
Hi, everyone. I am Kelly. This is Two Broads Talking Politics, and I am on with Brittany Ramos DeBarros, who is running for Congress in 2022 in the New York 11th District. Hi, Brittany.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. So let's just start with some background. Tell me a little bit about you and why you're running for Congress.
Sure. I was raised in a pretty conservative military family. And so I grew up with this really strong sense of, kind of these values that we say are American values, right? Service and justice and equality. But I'm also biracial. And so looking around, I could also see that the America that my white family was living in is not the same as what my Black Puerto Rican family was living in. And so I think that planted really early, that bothered me at an early age, and it planted seeds for me. And also my parents really promoted this idea of, if anyone works hard enough, they can make it in America. And yet I watched my parents work incredibly hard, work multiple jobs a lot of the times. And then we still struggled, right? We struggled to keep our house. We had church friends bringing us groceries to help us get by. And again, I was left looking around and being like, something doesn't add up here. What's going on? And so I ended up going to college at the University of Miami on an Army scholarship. And I signed a contract when I was 18 that I wouldn't be free of until I was 30. And I always make a point to say that because I think a lot of people don't realize that that's how that works. And by the time I graduated in 2011, I was a platoon leader in the Army, commissioned as an officer, and responsible for 40 lives at 22 and had deployment orders to Afghanistan already. And when I went, I had become more and more politicized, but I still really believed back then that, what we're told about the wars, which is that I was going to fight for freedom. I was going to help the Afghan people. And I was a true believer in that. And I got there. When I got there, it was impossible to deny, spending time with Afghan families, that we were doing so much more harm than good. And so I came home angry and hurt and confused. And I got involved in racial and economic justice work and, spent a lot of time kind of just going, I was in the reserves, going through the motions, but trying to make sense of, what I had experienced firsthand and the disconnect between what I had experienced and what we're told. And so fast forward, I didn't talk much about being a vet. I didn't talk much about the war until Colin Kaepernick took a knee. I saw so many people writing, saying, oh, I can't support him because the veterans and the flag and all these things. And I was looking around as a person who was a combat veteran saying, what are you all talking about? And so, again, bright-eyed to a fault, I was like, if I just write my arguments out, then people will see this differently. So I wrote this elaborate, I was also a debate nerd in high school and college. So I wrote my debater bullet points, arguments of why this was in fact quite aligned with the freedom fighting and, kind of standing up for justice that we say that we believe in this country. And that if anything, it should be considered patriotic. And I was really struck by how many people replied to that post and said, you made points here that I hadn't thought about. Thank you for writing this, but I still just can't support him because of veterans. And I realized in that moment how empty, right? How much we had been conditioned to have this empty idea of what it meant to even support the troops or support vets or, these kind of ideas of patriotism. And so I got involved in movement. I went looking, and before then I had been doing other kind of social justice work, but then I got involved in movement, right? And so I joined the Poor People's Campaign. I became one of the founding coordinating committee members for the New York Poor People's Campaign and eventually went on to work on the national team and About Face, Veterans Against the War, where I currently work. And I'm the organizing director for About Face. But that put me on a trajectory where I finally started speaking up and saying, hey, I'm a vet. I deployed. I experienced these wars, and they're not right. It's wrong. It's not aligned with the values that we say that this country is about. And so that's a little bit about how I got here. After that, I was investigated by the military for sharing just literal publicly available facts about what was going on. It was like splashed on the front page of the Army Times with some absurd headline like Army officer goes on anti-military tirade, which anti-military tirade is like, hello, everyone, we are bombing 7 countries. You should be aware of that. Hello. Our DOD burns 10.3 million gallons of oil per day, according to our DOD reports that are public, right? And, I guess that was the tirade. So, but I really felt like I was looking these 18, 19-year-olds in the face who were getting assigned to my unit still as an officer who I saw myself in, right? Who were true believers, believed that they were going to go do these great and just things. And I realized I can't participate in this lie anymore, even if it's with my own silence and complicity. And so, all of that is kind of the story of how I got involved in movement and really stepping up and fighting for the things that we say we believe in. And I had no plans to run for office. I was quite satisfied and focused on my, in my role in movement. And organizers I know and respect came to me in the district and said, hey, we want to show that another strategy is possible in this district. We want to run an unapologetic campaign that fights for working class values and working class policies that we know are popular. And we think you should run. And I was like, this is a terrible idea. I curse like a sailor. I am not like, this like buttoned up billboard respectable person. And they were like, yeah, that's why you should do this. And so here I am, and we announced about 3 months ago, and it's been a hell of a ride already, but I really think that we are doing something historic, and I think we have a shot to win, but I think that what we're doing is powerful and historic regardless of.
So let's talk about the New York 11th District. So, and of course, we are talking at a time when maps are being drawn, and so we don't know exactly what the district will look like by the time you are running for Congress. But the New York 11th in recent years, it has voted Republican, and then in 2018 voted for a Democratic congressperson, and then in 2020 voted for a Republican congressperson. And so it's this sort of flippy but leaning red kind of district. It's the only district that has New York City that has voted for a Republican to Congress in 2020. So what are the people there like? What does this district look like to you, and what's sort of your path to victory then?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, I mentioned why people said that they thought I should run. But one of the reasons I said yes is because I was reminded of how many doors I've knocked in the district and how frustrated I felt talking to folks, even in other parts of New York City, by how misunderstood our neighborhoods I feel really are. And, there's this internalized, even within Staten Island kind of organizers, we often have internalized this kind of very defeatist idea of what's going on and what's possible. But when you knock on the doors, I think the team of folks working on this campaign has probably knocked thousands and thousands of doors in this district, including Staten Island, right? And what we hear over and over, what I heard was not a concern about how progressive policies were, right? Even when we've had progressive candidates, it was a concern about what was possible and a frustration, right? So maybe they had a question about, this sounds great, but can we win this here, right? Is this even, I'm afraid, kind of a fear, right? Afraid to even hope for this because I don't want to get my hopes up. And then on the flip side, I also constantly heard people say, why bother? Why bother vote? Why bother show up? Because I can't even tell the difference between the Republican candidate and the Democrat candidate. And, what we've seen is that this kind of these series of assumptions, I think that people have internalized about what's going on in our district and in our neighborhoods have led, Democrats, for understandable reasons, I think in the past, to decide that what they had to do, right, that the front runner had to be a centrist or even sometimes a right-wing candidate. And there's this, attitude of like, well, this is just what you have to do. And yet what we've actually seen when you look at the numbers is incredibly low Democrat turnout. At the last competitive primary, which was considered a pretty exciting primary, we have 11% Democratic primary turnout, which is, and we're talking about 200,000 registered Democrats. So you're talking about, 15 to 20,000 people who decided out of that entire base of people who are registered. And certainly, let me just preempt, there are folks who know this district and who will say, yes, but a slice of those registered Democrats are Democrats in name only, right? They're actually conservatives. Absolutely. It is not 90% of them. I would argue it's not even 50% of them. I would argue it's probably not even a third of them, And so for me, that was an early indicator looking at those numbers that there's something else going on, that is beyond just, right? That the candidates that we've been having, even the ones that have been considered exciting, have not been actually exciting our base. And then, another thing is that, that kind of supports that is that when you actually look at the district, most people are shocked to hear that Democrats actually outnumber Republicans 2-1 in our district. And it's branded as this like Republican borough. Right. But what we actually have is a very consistent base of Republican voters and a very disenergized or unenergized. I don't know which is the correct word, but you feel me, like a very not energized Democratic base. And then we have another 200,000 people who are not really engaging with the system at all. Right. Whether they don't vote, they're not registered with a party or whatever that is. And as the district becomes increasingly young, it becomes younger. It is the fastest diversifying district in New York right now. Those are all opportunities for us to realize that what I think a lot of folks who really looked at the data and checked our assumptions, what people are actually hungry for is someone who is not trying to be all things to all people, right? Not trying to kind of play to the conservatives while also holding on to the Democrats, right? Someone who is not trying to flip someone else's base, but who is dedicated to energizing and expanding our core base. And that is not just good for this cycle, but it's good for the long run, because even when we've gotten one term, we've had a new rep every 2 years for over a decade in New York 11. Like, that's wild, And so these people with this strategy that we've had, this conventional wisdom, keep getting rejected by the entire electorate, right? And so, and we've also seen folks run on a somewhat progressive platform and then swing really right when they get elected. We saw that with Max Rose, arguably. We saw that with McMahon before him, who ran on a healthcare platform and then voted against healthcare and got rejected, right? And so, we're doing a new thing. We're saying, let's really energize and engage the base. Let's really be out in the community. Let's really focus on communities that have been written off. And let's organize our majority. Let's energize and turn out our majority instead of trying to flip someone else's majority and then being in an impossible position when trying to hold the seat.
Yeah. So what are those issues that do engage the base and that engage the people in the neighborhoods in your district, and also that engage you, that are driving you to run?
Yeah. Well, so there's a lot of things. I mean, I will say that like Staten Island in particular is like its own little bubble in New York City. And so, people are very focused on hyperlocal concerns that are happening, but those hyperlocal concerns are definitely manifestations of macro issues that we're seeing across society that the Congress needs to address. And so, even when we think about economics, right? New York 11 is a quintessential working class borough. We have the highest union density in the city, something I think we're very proud of, and as we should be. And what we see is that the dynamics of economics are still playing out. Right now, we have Easy Pass workers who had to fight just to get basic labor protections in their jobs in our Easy Pass office here in Staten Island all through the pandemic. I mean, you should listen to some of the stories that I've heard from some of the workers there who now, because the city is trying to do cost-cutting measures, is deciding that they are trying to close that office and offer it, have a competitive corporate contract. And the only way that there's going to be cost-cutting is undercutting labor, right? And so now not only have they had to fight for basic quality working conditions, they've had to fight to now keep their jobs for being called essential for a year, right? And it's just a level of disrespect that's ridiculous. And that's one example on the kind of labor and worker front. We have housing that is poisoning our people. We have serious environmental justice issues, in housing and beyond. We have a wetland. There has been a lot of organizing around something called the Graniteville Wetland, where BJ's has decided that they want to pave and build a BJ's. Meanwhile, we have dozens of giant empty lots and giant empty buildings where the BJ's could just move in, right? But nope, they're determined that it's going to be built on this wetland. That wetland, we still have families on the South Shore of Staten Island and in South Brooklyn who are still recovering from Hurricane Sandy over 8 years ago. And the wetlands are one of the only natural barriers. No, kind of human-made barriers or protections have really been established since then, because it's gotten gridlocked, by the Army Corps of Engineers and all of these things as people have tried to build those things. And the wetlands is a natural protection because that spongy wetlands area absorbs volumes of floodwater that, a paved over land could never absorb, which acts as a storm shield for the entire rest of the city in North Jersey. And so, that's just one other example. And then development, we don't have a single major developer that is actually based in Staten Island. And we have developers coming in and getting, tax dollars subsidized deals to build buildings that consistently don't actually meet the needs of our communities. So you have people kind of creating these like growth zone areas, right? But then they're cutting out the poorest communities on the left and the right of that zone when they do the affordable housing kind of assessments. So then the so-called 30% affordable housing or whatever is not actually accessible to the people who need it in that neighborhood. That's just one example. We were going to have the world's largest Ferris wheel. They spent millions putting in the foundation for that, and then it just got canceled. We have an outlet mall that got built on our North Shore down the street from where I live that is now sitting almost empty. And, some of that can be written off as an impact of COVID and, the impact that that's had on small business and on commerce just generally, but not all of it, certainly not all of it, because we've seen it over and over. We don't have a single public hospital in the entire borough of Staten Island. In New York City, in one of the wealthiest, right? We have it is one of the most concentrated hubs of wealth in the world. And we don't have a single public hospital in the entirety of Staten Island. That's just unacceptable. And that's an issue of priorities. So, I think our community is concerned about these things as well as, education. I know I'm going on and on, but it's really an outrage. It really is. And you can't tell, I'm really upset about these things. And it's just, we've just had promise after promise. And, it takes 2.5 hours to get from one end of the island to the other. Also in the American city that has some of the best public transportation in the country, right? And it's like Staten Island has just been left. We've been promised a rail, we've been promised all these things, and they just keep not happening. And so I think for me, what I'm clear that, a lot of the roots of these issues are real structural and systemic issues. So I try to be clear that I'm not promising that I can fix all of these things, certainly not in 2 years in a first term. And I'm not trying to make excuses for myself, but I want to be real with people. And I want us to be building a movement that is about addressing these issues at the roots, right? That is about electing working class champions who in practice and in promise are genuinely loyal to our communities in fighting not just for immediate harm reductive policy change, but is committed to economic structural change that is needed so that we can have budgets that actually match the priorities that benefit the people who need our resources. And that's all of us.
Yeah. Can you talk to me about your slogan that, is clearly inspired by Shirley Chisholm?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we went back and forth because some folks were like, well, maybe we shouldn't borrow it, right? But I was kind of just like, I hate the individualism, the very individualistic culture of our electoral process, which is awkward as a candidate because I know I'm supposed to be like, hello, look at me, I'm Brittany, I'm running, blah, blah, blah. I get that. I'm doing the whole shtick, but I try to always say that we should be in the practice as working class people, as movement of drafting the people we want to run and represent us based on an agenda that we are trying to advance. And that's what, I think that that's the spirit of what we're trying to make sure is a part of this campaign, that this campaign, I am the torchbearer, I'm the candidate, but it's not about me. It's not about my career. It's not about, whatever kind of like, it's just not about me. And so, we just kept coming back to this thing that I was like, it's a reminder for me why I'm doing this and what this is about, which is about legacy, right? It's about a legacy of Black, Brown, Indigenous women who have run not because of their ego or their career goals, but because it was necessary, because other leaders were failing our people. And I think that that's the spirit of what I hope this campaign is about. And it's a reminder to me to not buckle to the powers and pressures of a system that is not designed for for someone like me to run, right? And to retain myself, right? To not try to bend myself into some kind of mold for this system, but to be the kind of candidate that I always wish I had the opportunity to vote for, and that I know a lot of people in our communities are hungry for the opportunity to vote for. Again, not because there's something that's special about me, but because we're doing something special. We're committed to doing something special for us. And so unbought, unbossed, unafraid, I think that those are 3 reminders for me and for all of us that we, I hope that we carry throughout this, because it would be arrogant for me not to, to assume that I'm not going to struggle with the realities of power and pressure in a system that currently is not structured to work for the people that I'm committed to, that I'm loyal to.
So if our listeners would like to join your movement, would like to help out this cause, how can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one is donate. I mean, our finance folks will, kill me if I don't lead with that, because we broke, we had a pretty unprecedented raise for a candidate like me in our first quarter. We raised $130,000 about in our first 6 weeks, which, is like amazing. And, between COVID and the New York City elections happening right now, and the fact that our district almost looks a little bit more like a southern, like a North Texas or a Georgia district, but we're in New York City. So we're in kind of a weird in between in terms of the infrastructure to support a campaign and a candidate like me. We need grassroots support from all around the country. And so donate. We also have a volunteer sign up and help us spread the word and raise awareness. Our social media is BRITT 4 Congress across all platforms. Follow us, share the content, help spread the word. And our website is Brittany, BRITTANY, 4 Congress spelled out this time, 4 spelled out.org. And there you can donate, you can sign up to volunteer, and you can stay apprised of all of the exciting things that are going on.
And see your terrific launch video.
Yes, thank you.
I also, I'm quite impressed that your entire website is in both English and Spanish, every word of it. So it's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, we worked hard on that because there's a lot of language in there that's kind of movementy language. So it doesn't always work in the auto translators, right? So we had to call in our friends. Friends from movement, friends and volunteers. Volunteers helped make sure that was possible and that it was accurate. And so, shout out to all of the folks who have already been, throwing down. Oh, our volunteers actually, they're so hype. It's really humbling every day. They just started their own Instagram account, Volunteers for Brittany. So also follow it on Instagram if you're looking for volunteer orientations and signups. That's where you can get some of that information directly from the volunteers who are organizing.
Excellent. Is there anything else that you want to make sure we talk about today?
The thing is, I think sometimes folks, I'm hearing a lot of fatigue, right? We just went through one of the most intense election cycles of our life. I'm still exhausted from that. I'm going to keep it real, right? I have so much energy and excitement for what we're doing, and I'm still recovering from the burnout of showing up for that election, right? And I know a lot of other people are too. But these midterms are going to be critical, right? We saw this under Obama. The way that when we lost the Congress, right, it really blocked our ability to continue building momentum towards some bold policies. And we just cannot afford that. We can't. Trumpism is alive and well. My candidate is literally still running I Stand with Trump ads, which is horrifying, And so I just want to remind folks of that, but it's okay. Take the time to rest that you need, but just know that the fight is still ahead of us. and that, supporting candidates that are really, we have to grow our numbers in terms of people who are unapologetically and boldly progressive and fighting for working class people. We have to grow our numbers if we really want to pass the things that we need to pass, like Medicare for all, Green New Deal, ending the wars, right? All of these things. And so I want to remind folks of that. And the other thing I want to say is that there's a lot more veterans running who are Democrats. And I think that that's exciting in ways, but I also see that a lot of them are buckling to this pressure to wrap themselves in a false plastic kind of patriotism that is really not serving our ability to move towards the values that we say that we believe in. And so I think that the other exciting thing and trailblazing thing about this campaign is that it's been a really long time since there was a vet running with real support, with real viability, who was unapologetically against the wars, who was unapologetically saying we need to transform the way that we think about national security and foreign policy and the way that we engage with our neighbors around the world. And so to solve problems that are bigger than just American problems, right? And especially climate change. So I think that's really important. And I think that the narrative opportunity here to be able to stand up and support other squad members who are saying similar things, who are not always positioned the way that vets can be positioned to speak to this from a place of personal experience. I think that is a really important thing to invest in, that we are committed to building and committing to kind of blazing a new trail on. So for anyone who's far outside our district, I would argue that that's another thing to consider in terms of why we are, an important investment going into this next cycle.
Well, I suspect we could talk all day, but let's wrap up there, and maybe we'll have you on again to to keep talking about all of this.
I love that.
All right. Well, Brittany, thank you so much, and thank you for stepping up and running. We didn't mention, but you're also pretty young. You're in your early 30s, and so thank you for stepping up so early to run for Congress.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Kelly, and for the work that you all do on the podcast to highlight important candidates around the country.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at twobroadstalk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.